So here's the thing about family legends, they have a way of growing over time. A journey becomes an adventure becomes a heroic quest. And a man who headed west with gold fever in 1849, well, in a family's retelling over 170 years, he becomes a proper 49er. A legend. A man who wrestled California's gold from the earth with his bare hands. But what if the records tell a different story? What if you go looking for your gold rush ancestor in every mining record that survives from 1849, 1850, 1851, and 1852, and you come up with absolutely nothing? No mining claim, no miner's registration, no county tax list with the word miner written next to his name. What then? That is exactly where this story begins. And I promise you, where it ends is far more interesting than anything I expected. Stay with me. Welcome to Ancestors and Algorithms, where family history meets artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Brian, and today we are heading west, way west, all the way to Gold Rush, California, 1849 to 1860. We've got a ghost to find, a family legend to test, and a research pivot that completely rewrote what I thought I knew about this family line. We are featuring 4 AI tools today: Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini via AI Studio. All of them free to use, all of them essential to this investigation. Let's dig in, no pun intended. Let me paint you a picture. It is the spring of 1849. The word has spread from California to Ohio like wildfire. Gold. Mountains of it. Rivers running with it. All you have to do is get there and pick it up. Across the United States, ordinary men are doing extraordinary things. Farmers are selling their equipment. Clerks are quitting their jobs. Brothers are shaking hands and promising to write home. The newspapers are full of it. The churches are full of prayers from wives who know their husbands are about to make a very dangerous decision. William Calloway Hartfield, born in 1821 in Muskingum County, Ohio, was one of those men. 28 years old that spring. A farmer, the same as his father before him. A man who had spent his entire life working the same Ohio soil, watching the same Ohio seasons. And somewhere in early 1849, reading those newspaper accounts and listening to the talk at the general store, he decided that enough was enough. He wanted more. He wanted California. The family story, passed down through generations, was simple and proud. Great-great-grandpa Cal went to California in 1849. He was a 49er. He struck it rich. Now, before I get into the research, let me give you just a little historical context, because it matters for understanding why the records are the way they are. In 1849, roughly 90,000 people made their way to California. About half came by land and half by sea. The overland route, which an Ohio farmer like William Hartfield would have almost certainly have taken, meant joining a wagon train departing from Missouri in the spring, following the California Trail across the plains and over the Sierra Nevada, and arriving in California, if everything went reasonably well, sometime in the late summer or early autumn. The sea route meant sailing around the Cape Horn at the tip of South America, a journey of 5 to 8 months. Or, if you were willing to make a 2-part trip, sailing to Panama, crossing the Isthmus overland, and boarding a Pacific Mail steamship for the final leg. The point of all this? Getting to California in 1849 was not a casual decision. It required months of planning, significant expense, and genuine physical courage. Men who went typically planned on being gone for a year or two. Some were. Some never came back. And the record keeping that existed to document all of this was, at best, informal. California achieved statehood in September 1850. Before that, much of the state operated on a mix of Mexican land law, improvised mining district customs, and the kind of record keeping you'd expect from a territory that had tripled its population practically overnight. It was chaotic by any standard. County governments were forming in real time, courts were being established. Nobody was thinking primarily about archival preservation. Which is why, when researchers ask me to help trace their gold rush ancestors, I take a deep breath first. This era rewards patience and creative thinking more than almost any other in American genealogy. But this is also exactly why AI has become so powerful in my research practice. Not to find the records for me, that's not how it works. Remember, AI is your research assistant, not your researcher. But to help me think through what records might even exist, where they might be held today, and then to make sense of what I find when I actually dig them up. That's where these tools earn their keep. Let me tell you how this case started. The 1860 federal census for Sacramento County, California. That is where I first located a William C. Hartfield, age 39, occupation farmer, real estate value impressive. Birthplace, Ohio. Wife, 2 children, all born in California. He is right there in Sacramento County in 1860, settled and prosperous. And I thought, great, I've found him. I just need to trace him backward through the 1850s and fill in the decade between when he left Ohio and when he shows up as a successful Sacramento Valley farmer. Seems manageable, right? Here's where it gets interesting. Before I went deeper into the California records, I made one important stop back in Ohio. And right there in the 1850 federal census for Muskingum County, I found him. William Hartfield, age 29, farmer. Still in Ohio. That confirmed he had not yet left for California when the census takers came through in 1850, which meant his departure came sometime in the months after that. Good. That gave me a firm baseline to work from. Then I turned to the 1852 California State Census. California held a state census in 1852, and it is one of the earliest records that actually documents who was in the state. It covers most counties, though not perfectly, and it is searchable through Family Search. I searched for Hartfield, and I found a William Hartfield listed in Tuolumne County. Mining country. Mother lode country. The absolute heart of the gold rush. My pulse quickened. This had to be him. William Hartfield in the gold country in 1852. The family legend seemed confirmed. Great-great-grandpa Cal was a 49er after all. But then I looked more carefully at the record. Age listed in the 1852 California State Census, 22. But William Calloway Hartfield was born in 1821. In 1852, he would have been 31. That's a 9-year discrepancy. That's not a census enumerator rounding up or down by a year or two. Census errors happen, sure. Enumerators routinely misread ages by 1 to 3 years. But 9 years? That's not a transcription error. That is a different person. I had found a different William Hartfield. A younger man, a miner in Tuolumne County, entirely unrelated to the farmer from Ohio I was chasing. And suddenly I had a very specific problem. My ancestor was not in the mining records. Not in Tuolumne County, not in El Dorado County, not in Calaveras County. I searched every Gold Rush county that had digitized records available. Nothing. The man who was supposed to be a legendary 49er had vanished from the mining records entirely. He was a ghost. Okay, step back, think. This is exactly the moment where most researchers either give up or start making assumptions. And making assumptions in genealogy is how family legends get created and reinforced in the first place. I needed to understand the full landscape of what records actually survived from 1849 to 1855 California before I could figure out what I was missing. So I turned to Perplexity. If you haven't used Perplexity for historical research context, here's what makes it different from other AI tools. It searches the web in real time and returns cited answers. Not just AI generated guesses, but actual sources you can click, open, and verify. That is essential when you're trying to understand what records survive from a chaotic, rapidly changing era. I don't want an AI making up a record repository. I want it to show me where it learned about that repository so I can go confirm it myself. Here's the prompt I used: copy it, adapt it to your era, and run it before you go looking for your own migration era ancestor. Prompt number 1. Quote, I'm researching a California gold rush ancestor who arrived in 1849. What specific genealogical record type survived from California between 1849 and 1860 that would document miners and early settlers? Please list each record type, where it would typically be found, whether it has been digitized, and where researchers can access it online to date, end quote. What Perplexity gave me back was honestly a little overwhelming, in the best possible way. It returned a detailed, sourced breakdown of records I had not fully considered. The 1850 federal census was there, yes, but Perplexity flagged something important. California only achieved statehood in September 1850, and census takers were still working through remote mining regions when the enumeration closed. Coverage was thin. Many new arrivals weren't counted. Men who were camped in temporary mining shelters or who had moved between claims multiple times during the year were particularly likely to be missed. Then there was the 1852 California state census, which I had already found. County tax assessments held at county recorder offices across the state, many now available through the California State Library in Sacramento. These are underused by researchers and worth knowing about. California counties began assessing property taxes almost immediately after statehood, and the tax list often identify occupations. Mining district ledgers, which were kept locally by the individual mining district recorder. These are notoriously hit or miss for survival. Most mining districts were informal, temporary, and didn't prioritize paperwork when the gold ran out and everyone moved on. Ship passenger list for those who arrived by sea, available through Family Search and the Maritime Heritage Project website online. Overland wagon train lists compiled by researcher Louis Rasmussen, covering arrivals from 1849 to 1852. These were compiled from newspaper extracts and are not comprehensive, but they're a starting point. And then something caught my eye. County recorder land transaction records, which were established almost immediately after California statehood and are among the best preserved early California documents precisely because land ownership had legal and financial implications that people cared about preserving. That last category was the one I had not properly searched, and it turned out to be the key. For my Australian listeners, Family Search is a completely free global resource with millions of digitized records from Australia, the UK, and dozens of other countries. If you're searching for a colonial era Australian ancestor, start there. Trove at trove.nla.gov.au is Australia's equivalent of chronicling America for digitized historical newspapers, and it is an extraordinary free resource worth bookmarking right now. Australian researchers digging into the 1850s gold rush period in Victoria, specifically the Ballarat and Bedingo rushes, which were partially inspired by California's 1849 rush, will find that Trove's newspaper archive has rich coverage of that era. For my UK listeners, 1851 was a census year in England, Wales, and Scotland, and that census is fully digitized and searchable on Find My Past and Scotland's People. The principle is identical to what I'm doing here. Find the census that overlaps with your research window and make it your first stop. Now, back to California. Perplexity confirmed that the primary mining counties of the Gold Rush era were the Sierra Nevada foothill counties: Butte, Calaveras, El Dorado, Mariposa, Tuolumne, and Yuba, with Nevada and Placer counties formed from the Yuba County in 1851 as the mining population spread further into the foothills. If William C. Hartfield was working in the mining districts at any point between 1849 and 1855, his name should surface in at least one record from at least one of these counties. I went back and checked every available digitized record for every Gold Rush county a second time, this time armed with a complete record type list Perplexity had given me: county tax lists, mining district ledger fragments, early newspaper notices in the Alta California and the Sacramento Union. Nothing. And that's when I recognized the problem I was creating for myself. I kept looking for William C. Hartfield in the places I expected him to be, rather than asking where the evidence actually suggested he might be. This is exactly what professional genealogists call reasonably exhaustive research. The genealogical proof standard's first element asks us to conduct a thorough search of all sources that might provide evidence relevant to the question. And the honest answer was, I had searched exhaustively in the wrong category of sources. A mining focused search is not reasonably exhaustive if your ancestor may not have been mining. That realization brought me to Claude. Claude is my first choice when I have multiple documents that need to be compared and analyzed against each other. This is where Claude shines. Not just reading one document, but holding several in its analytical memory simultaneously and identifying the connections, the contradictions, and the logical implications. It's the kind of detailed, patient comparison work that most of us find genuinely tedious to do manually when we're staring at 3 or 4 documents across multiple browser tabs. I took the 2 William Hartfield records and gave Claude both of them with this prompt. Prompt number 2. Quote, I'm comparing 2 historical records that both list a William Hartfield in California in the early 1850s. Here are the details. Record 1, 1850 Federal Census, Muskingum County, Ohio. William Hartfield, age 29, occupation farmer, birthplace Ohio. Record 2, 1852 California State Census, Tuolumne County, California. William Hartfield, age 22, occupation minor, birthplace listed as unknown. I believe my ancestor William Hartfield was born around 1821, making him 29 in 1850 and 31 in 1852. Please analyze whether these 2 records could represent the same person. Note any inconsistencies and suggest what additional records I should search to either confirm or rule out that these are the same individual, end quote. Claude's response was methodical and, honestly, a little validating. It laid out the inconsistencies with precision. The age gap of 9 years between what the Tuolumne record shows, 22, and what my research suggests, 31, is far outside the range of standard census transcription error. Claude noted that enumerators routinely misread or rounded ages by 1 to 3 years, especially with older adults who were themselves uncertain of their birth year. But a 9-year discrepancy? That is a different person, not a transcription problem, not an approximation. A different individual named William Hartfield, who happened to be in the mining districts while my ancestor was somewhere else entirely. Claude also walked through the timeline. The overland journey from Ohio to California via the California Trail, which was the most common route for Midwest residents, typically took 5 to 6 months when departing in spring or early summer. A man leaving Muskingum County in March or April of 1849 could realistically expect to arrive in California by September or October of that year. The 1850 federal census was conducted in California beginning in late 1850, but coverage of the mining regions was incomplete, particularly for men who were camped in remote areas or who had moved frequently between claims. A missed enumeration was entirely plausible. But here's the key thing Claude pointed out that shifted my entire approach. If the Tuolumne County William Hartfield is a different, younger man, where is my William Hartfield? And rather than giving me a vague suggestion, Claude asked a specific question. Have you searched for land transaction records in Sacramento County in the period 1849 to 1853? Men who tried mining and abandoned it often transitioned to agriculture, particularly in the Sacramento Valley, where fertile land was available at low prices in the early 1850s because miners weren't interested in farming. County deed records begin with California statehood in September 1850 and are among the best preserved early California documents. That was the pivot in my thinking. I had been looking for a miner. The evidence was suggesting I needed to look for a farmer. But first, I needed to tackle something that every California gold rush researcher eventually faces: handwritten records that are genuinely difficult to read. I had found a Sacramento County land deed from 1851 digitized through a California County records collection accessible via family search. The image had been photographed from microfilm, which adds a layer of contrast and blur that makes already challenging 19th century cursive even harder to parse. I could make out portions of the document, but one crucial line, the buyer's name, was frustratingly unclear. I could see it was a two-syllable surname starting with what looked like an H, but beyond that, I was squinting and guessing. This is where Gemini via AI Studio earns its place in my toolkit. If you're not using Gemini via AI Studio for handwriting transcription, please stop what you're doing after this episode and try it. Go to aistudio.google.com, upload your document image, and ask it to transcribe the handwritten text. This tool has become my standard for this specific function. In my experience across 34 episodes and hundreds of document images, it surpasses every other AI tool for 19th century American script. Other tools are improving, but for consistent, reliable handwriting transcription, Gemini via AI Studio is where I start. My prompt for this task was straightforward. Quote, please transcribe all handwritten text visible in this document image. This appears to be a 19th century American legal document. Please indicate any words or phrases you are uncertain about by placing them in brackets with a question mark, end quote. The transcription came back within seconds. And there it was, unmistakable in Gemini's output. William C. Hartfield. Not just William Hartfield, William C. Hartfield. The C standing for Callaway, his middle name. The name the family had always used to distinguish him. The name that had followed him from Ohio to California and into the deed records of the Sacramento Valley. The deed was dated September 14th, 1851. William Callaway Hartfield had purchased 80 acres of farmland in the Sacramento Valley on September 14th, 1851. He was not mining. He had not been mining for some time, if he had mined at all. I want to stop here and name what just happened in research terms, because this is directly relevant to your own practice. What Claude had done, identifying the inconsistency between two records and redirecting me toward a new record category, is exactly what GPS Element 3 looks like in action: thorough analysis and correlation of evidence. I didn't just find a record that matched the name and assume it was my ancestor. I compared the documents, recognized the conflict, and followed the evidence toward a more defensible conclusion. That is how professional genealogists operate. That is the standard the Board for Certification of Genealogists applies to submitted work. And yes, AI got me there faster, but AI is your research assistant, not your researcher. The analysis, the decision, the judgment call about whether these two William Hartfields were the same person, that was mine to make. Claude gave me the framework and the right question to ask next. The answer required a human judgment. But I still had a gap. September 1851 gave me William C. Hartfield buying land. What about 1849 and 1850? Those first 2 years after his arrival were unaccounted for. I knew from the overland travel timeline that he would have arrived in California no earlier than September 1849. That left roughly 2 years between his arrival and that land deed, and I had no documents covering that window. This is where I reached for a tool you might not instinctively think of for this kind of historical problem: ChatGPT. ChatGPT is my brainstorming partner. It doesn't produce cited sources the way Perplexity does, and it doesn't bring Claude's analytical precision to multi document comparison. But for generating creative, wide ranging lists of research possibilities, for thinking beyond the standard record categories, for asking what else might be out there, ChatGPT is genuinely useful. Think of it as the colleague who reads everything and remembers unusual sources you've never heard of. Prompt number 3. Quote, I'm researching an ancestor who traveled to California in 1849 during the gold rush, but appears to have left the mining districts quickly and settled as a farmer. I cannot find him in any mining specific records. What are 10 non obvious record types, beyond the standard census and vital records, that might document a man's activities in California between 1849 and 1855? Please include records that might be found both in California and in his home state of Ohio, end quote. ChatGPT came back with a list that included some things I'd already considered and some I absolutely had not. The standard census records, tax lists, and land deeds, those were expected. But then it got interesting. Store ledgers and account books from early Sacramento merchants, sometimes preserved in county historical societies, because early California businesses often extended credit and kept detailed account books with customer names. Letters published in hometown newspapers back in Ohio, because local papers in the 1850s frequently ran letters from community members who had gone west, as a kind of crowdsourced news coverage from the frontier. Small town Ohio editors would print letters from California correspondents, and those letters sometimes mentioned other men from the same community by name. County histories from the 1880s and 1890s, which often included short biographical sketches of pioneer settlers who were still alive to tell their own stories in their own words. These county histories were typically sold by subscription, and the families of successful long-term residents often paid to have their patriarch included. Church records, particularly from denominations that followed settlers west, like the Methodist Episcopal Church, which established congregations in Sacramento as early as 1849. And overland trail diaries and letters from sometimes mentioned traveling companions by name, increasingly digitized through university library collections, including the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley. ChatGPT also suggests something I wouldn't have thought of: directories. Not city directories in the modern sense, but early California business directories and gazetteers that began being published in the mid 1850s to document the growing commercial class of the state. A man who transitioned from mining to farming early might show up in those directories as a property owner or supplier. For my UK listeners, the county history idea has a direct parallel in British research. Many English and Welsh counties publish historical directories, biographical dictionaries, and county histories throughout the Victorian era, and many of those are digitized through resources like Find My Past, the Internet Archive, and County Record Office digital collections. If your ancestor was a reasonably successful farmer, tradesperson, or business owner in rural England or Wales in the second half of the 19th century, there's a reasonable chance a county history or directory mentions them by name. That county history suggestion was the one that cracked this case open. I searched for Sacramento County histories published in the 1880s. The California State Library in Sacramento, the Sutro Library in San Francisco, and Google Books all hold digitized versions of these old county histories, and they are searchable. In an 1880 history of Sacramento County, I found a short biographical notice for W.C. Hartfield, listed among the pioneer settlers and farmers of the county. Without quoting it directly, The notice described his arrival in California in the autumn of 1849, noted that he attempted mining along the American River for approximately 6 weeks before concluding the work was unprofitable, and went on to describe the agricultural land he purchased in the valley and the successful farm he built there over the following 3 decades. 6 weeks. That is how long William Calloway Hartfield was a miner. 6 weeks along the American River in the early winter of 1849 before he made a decision that would define his family's California story for the next 170 years. What he did in the nearly 2 years between putting down the pen and signing that deed, the records don't say. Worked for wages, most likely. Saved. Watched the valley take shape around him. There are stretches in every family story that the documents simply cannot reach. This is one of them. He put down the pen, he picked up the deed. Let's talk about what this means for your research this week. If you have an ancestor who participated in a major historical migration, whether that's the Gold Rush, the Oregon Trail, the Great Migration of African Americans northward in the early 20th century, an immigration voyage, or any other moment when large numbers of people moved rapidly from one place to another, you may be facing a version of the same challenge I encountered with Cal Hartfield. Records from chaotic, fast-moving eras are incomplete. People were missed. Fires happened. Clerks made errors. And the family legend that formed in the decades after the event may have captured the emotional truth without fully capturing the documentary truth. Your homework for this week is this. Take one ancestor who traveled somewhere new during a major historical migration event. One ancestor. Then open Perplexity and run a variation of the prompt I used today. Quote, what genealogical records survive from specific time period in specific location that would document individuals who specific activity. Please include where these records are held, whether they have been digitized, and how to access them, end quote. Then take the records Perplexity identifies that you haven't already searched and go look. If you find any records at all, copy the key details into Claude and ask it to analyze for inconsistencies with what you already know. If you find handwritten documents you can't fully read, upload them to Gemini via AI Studio and ask for a transcription. And if you hit a dead end, take that dead end to ChatGPT. Quote, I cannot find this ancestor in record type, for time period, in location. What other records might document their activities during this period that I might not have considered, end quote. You will be surprised at what comes up. I say that having done this across 34 episodes now. The records that crack a case open are almost never the records you expected to find. They're the records you found only after asking better questions. Head to AncestorsandAI.com and follow the link to our Facebook group to share what you find with the community. We have more than 2,000 members in that group, and the collective knowledge in there is extraordinary. Some of the most creative research strategies I've encountered have come from group members comparing notes. If you found a ghost in your own family tree, someone in that community has probably faced the same era and the same geography. Post what you're working on. I also want to take a moment to say thank you. This show has crossed over 27,000 downloads, and that happens because you keep sharing it with the genealogists and family historians in your life. If this episode helped you think differently about a problem you've been stuck on, tell one person about it. That's all I ask. Word of mouth is how this community grows, and every new listener is another researcher who might finally break through a wall they've been stuck on for years. And if you've been getting value from these free episodes, I'd genuinely appreciate a review on your podcast platform of choice. Reviews help new researchers find the show, and writing one takes about 30 seconds. If you want to go deeper on everything we covered today, the companion guide for this episode is available to Patreon members, and you can find the link at AncestorsandAI.com. The companion guide for this episode includes 12 advanced prompts that walk you through a complete California Gold Rush research workflow, a step by step guide to the California State Library's digitized holdings, a framework for distinguishing between same name individuals using multi document analysis in Claude, and a section on how to use ChatGPT to build a research strategy when an ancestor has completely vanished from the expected records. The free episode gives you everything you need to start applying this approach today. The companion guide is for researchers who want to master it. Thank you so much for listening to Ancestors and Algorithms. I'm your host, Brian, and I will see you next week for another journey into the past powered by the future. Until then, happy researching.